Along with Three Rings, the Cottage Groves, Mortabon Chapel and the Bear Island Ring. And Mortabon Chapel was written by a fellow called Ed Reevy, who spent most of his life in Philadelphia. He originally came from a place called County Cavan, and he wrote lots of tunes that quickly entered the traditional repertoire. Even though they're brand new tunes, they were still considered traditional. How he managed to do that, I don't know. Payola, yeah, of course. He paid the traditional government an extra donation, and even though he only wrote the tune yesterday, it was considered traditional. He wrote it yesterday and already it had been handed down to 12 generations. And then the third tune is called The Bear Island Ring, written by a great musician called Fiddler Dwyer, who comes from, he died a couple of years back. He came from Castletown Bear, which is on the Bear Peninsula, and just off the mainland is the island, Bear Island. And Castletown Bear and Bear Peninsula and Bear Island are all spelled differently. One's B-E-R-E, one's B-E-A-R-E, and one is B-E-A-R. It's a great country, isn't it? Do you know another interesting thing about Ireland? The highest cliffs in Europe are the cliffs of Moher in County Clare, but the highest cliffs in Ireland are in Donegal. Now, it was, let's see, it's a very confusing tale. It was called Kitty O'Shea, which intrigued me because I remembered from my history books there was a big scandal in Irish politics. A famous politician, Charles Stewart Parnell. He was a very famous guy because he was an aristocrat, but he was apparently working hard to get rights for the poor people. But of course, we've all heard that before. You know. But before it could be, before his work came to fruition, it became known publicly, and of course his opponents used it as well as they could that he was having an affair with this woman who was married to a captain in the Irish Army, and her name was Kitty O'Shea. So the ensuing scandal meant that he had to leave his job in politics, and himself and Kitty went off together and spent the rest of their lives together, I think. And as far as I know, he never made any effort to get back into politics. So I thought it was great that someone could write this lovely piece of music in honour of a happy and successful love affair and the demise of a politician's career. But then I found out that it wasn't named after Kitty O'Shea at all. It was named after a woman called Kitty O'Neill. And Kitty O'Neill was a dancer in New York in the late years of the vaudeville era. And this tune is published in a book from the turn of the century, or 1920 or something like that, under the title Kitty O'Neill's Championship Jig. But it's not a jig, it's a hornpipe. But a very popular novelty dance in those vaudeville years involved dancing on sand. They'd sprinkle sand on stage and dance on the sand, and then as their feet moved through the sand, there'd be all these kind of swishing noises, and the sound of the sand kind of exaggerated the rhythms of the steps. So these sand dances were typically known as sand jigs, and that's why the admirer, Kitty's admirer, wrote the tune with the title Jig when actually it's hornpipe. And that's probably all you need to know, maybe more than you need to know, except of course that Kitty O'Neill wasn't her name either. I think her name was Ryan, Kathleen Connolly, and she died in Queens, New York in the 1950s. And I recorded this tune with some classical players, which was very interesting. Myself and Cal Scott decided we'd arrange some traditional tunes for a quartet, string quartet. So this is one of the tunes that we put together for the quartet. And I don't know how many of you out there read music, but a hornpipe is usually considered to be in 4/4 time. But actually it's not. It's really, if you want to be really pedantic, it's in 12/8. So we wrote out the score for the classical guys, 4 different instruments, the quartet, that means 4. Right? We wrote out the score for each of the different instruments in 4/4, and it took a long time because it's a long tune, 7 parts. Don't worry, I'll get to it soon. So when we had it all finished, we suddenly thought, these guys, they're professional readers. When you give them the sheet of music, they read it exactly as it's supposed to be there. So I mean, if it's supposed to be in 12/8, we should write it out in 12/8. Which is, for those of you who don't read music, it just means a lot more dots. A lot more dots. And you've 4 instruments, so you have to do it 4 times, and there's 7 parts to the thing, so it's, it's a lot of pen work. So we wrote it out in 12/8 because we didn't want these guys to be saying a bunch of hicks did it all wrong, So the first rehearsal came. We didn't know these guys, except we knew they were great classical players. which is why we asked them to help us out, because we weren't too sure what we were doing either. But we didn't want them to know that. So we brought out the score and said, this is the one we'd like to start our rehearsals with, you know, and they said, okay, fine. And it was the hornpipe in 12/8. And after about 20 minutes of kind of picking our way through it, you know, and coming up with a few suggestions here and there, and settling on the tempo, and one of the guys, the mouthier guy, says, you know, this would be a lot easier to read if it was in 4/4. So we said, really? He says, yeah, it's so many dots, you know, you can't. And it's consistent, it's the same all the way through, so like, you just write it in 4/4 and put a note at the top, swing the 8th notes, you know? Somebody says, oh, what, you mean like this? Which is what we had done in the first place. You know? So that was kind of fun. That broke the ice and our hearts. So anyway, here we go with Kitty O'Neill's Championship Jig, which is really a hornpipe and used to be called Kitty O'Shea, but her real name is Kathleen Connolly. 4/4 or 12/8, whichever.